Press the record button. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CAWASA's Wednesday webinar. And I think we're at number 18, or is it number 19? So this afternoon, we are pleased to have with us Mr. Kevin Carter, who has worked with the South Florida Water Resources for over 30 years. Since July 2015, Kevin has been the Broward County Water and Wastewater Services Assistant to the Director, with a focus on legislative and intergovernmental affairs, as well as special projects like grants. He holds leadership positions in the Florida section of the American Water Works Association, the AWWA, the Florida Water and Environment Association, and the Florida Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network. He's also an Operators Without Borders Advisory Committee member, and Operators Without Borders, you know very well, have been assisting us with our tutorials for the ABC exams. He previously worked with the South Florida Water Management District for 7 years, and also spent 14 years with Broward County's Environmental Agency. He's a member of the CWWA, the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, and this is his third conference presentation. He serves as on the CWWA's Water Law Specialist Group, as well as the 30th Anniversary Committee. Kevin is also an adjunct professor at the Broward College, and I'm pleased to introduce him, and we're happy to have you with us this evening to tell us a lot about water utility resilience. So
great.
The floor is yours, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Ignatius, for that very nice introduction. And thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to come speak with you. And I also want to thank Valerie Jenkinson, the chair of Operators Without Borders, for reaching out to me. And when Valerie and I were talking about topics, I said, well, you know, resiliency is something I'm hoping to about a couple of years ago. Got some updates. There's been a lot of things going on. There we go. No worries. That's part of the Zoom world that we live in. Resilient utilities. Why don't I give an update on that to CAWASA? And then after I gave Ignatius my topic, I said, well, I'm going to be talking about the Caribbean and Florida. So resilient utilities, parentheses, in the Caribbean and Florida. And every presentation that I get to give, I see as either a start of a conversation, if I haven't had the chance to meet you, or a continuance, for example, for Ignatius and I. But my contact information is there. This presentation is being archived. So if you're watching this a couple weeks from now, still feel free to reach out and talk to me, and we'll have a good conversation about resiliency. Hit the first slide, hopefully. Okay, so I just, I'm not sure where all of our attendees are from, but your speaker is from this blue area called Broward County. And hopefully can you see my pointer, Ignatius?
Yes, I can see the pointer, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So I know most of you all have heard of Miami, which is just to the south of us. Broward County is about 2 million people, and we have actually almost 26 water utilities in the county. I work for the county government's water utility. We service about 200,000 drinking water customers and 600,000 wastewater customers. And then I'd like to also think of us as very close neighbors, of course, in the water sector, if not in the same overall region when we think about it globally. And of course, our close connections with family and friends throughout the area. So today's agenda, because I figured we'll have, you know, some variety of backgrounds on resiliency, I've decided to sort of touch on a lot of different resiliency topics as they relate to water utilities. And so we're going to go through some of the organizations that are working towards to build a better resilient world, including water utilities. go into some specific water sector resilient practices, some of which you may know, and some maybe you hadn't thought of as being resilient before. And then some assessment tools. There's some tools out there that your utility, or perhaps a utility you work with in the private sector, could potentially use to understand sort of your status in the resilience realm, and maybe some things that you could do to build on your current efforts. And then we'll have time for questions and then have a conversation. So anytime I talk to particularly operators about resilience, I'm thinking you're probably going, well, we were resilient before resilient was cool. Certainly in the water utility sector, we have had to be resilient since we first started doing business. Just making water, treating water is a 24/7, 365 day a year job. And over time, people have thought of new ways to adapt, to do things better. And so certainly within our sector, I consider us already resilient. But one thing is the term resilience has sort of grabbed hold over the last decade. I like this definition from a group called, it was the Rockefeller Foundation. It's now, they are no longer in existence. They turned into several other initiatives, such as the Resilient 305, which is the area code for Miami. But their definition is one that I particularly like, because it's the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city, or if you're in a rural place, please consider a rural place in here as well, to survive, adapt, and grow no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. So in other words, when you are hit by a stressor or a shock, you don't just survive it, you come back stronger and learn how to thrive even better. And so that's, and again, there's no wrong or right definition of resilience, but that particularly one I like because it thinks of us becoming stronger. You know, water is life. We is certainly a saying that we all can grasp and agree with, and particularly when we think about it for our communities and the criticality to their resilience. One of the organizations I want to either introduce you to, or if you've heard of them, you know that the importance of the U.S. Water Alliance, and they have developed over the last decade or so this one water approach. The one water approach essentially says we comprehensively manage our wastewater, our stormwater, gray water, all the water together, and understand the best ways to use that to make us a resilient utility, including reusing wastewater, reusing stormwater, and those types of things, conserving groundwater. And within the U.S. Water Alliance model, you know, having that number one reliable and resilient water utilities is the key that, you know, kicks the circle of a resilient community into play. It helps thriving cities, businesses, agriculture obviously needs water, and all these things need social and economic inclusion. And of course, we need healthy waterways and water bodies and groundwater that lead to the number one reliable and resilient water utilities. This one water idea is certainly not new this year, but has really, I guess, over the last 3 or 4 years, grown across the globe. And in the United States, particularly the city of Los Angeles, One Water LA 2040 plan is certainly a model that if you haven't had an opportunity to review it, I've got a link there that you can visit it when you have the time. So a little closer to home, there's a group called the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. And if you look down, oh, wrong map. I got 3 screens up. So here you go. This map here, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe counties, basically the Southeast Florida, 6 million some people. And this slide is important to me to explain to you political buy-in to climate change response and being a resilient community. Because as workers within our agencies, either with a water utility or other, we may know the importance of being resilient. But if we don't have that political buy-in, if we don't have the community support, it makes it difficult or impossible to do practices and come up with resilient plans and strategies. So our county governments got together back in 2010, and they formed a compact with, there's probably 80 cities or so within Southeast Florida, and they had the mayor's climate pledge. And it was that policy direction. It said, yes, this is a priority for our region. We need to do things to be ready for it. Is not a question of if, but when, and then into what scale. And should we plan for, as far as particularly in Southeast Florida and similar to many of the Caribbean islands, sea level rise. We also have a climate action plan. We are working to reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions with smart buildings, working on more public transportation and promoting just carbon emission cutting practices. The other thing that the Regional Climate Action Plan does is includes 21 recommendations for water resilience. And so the compact itself actually deals with all sectors of society. And then at the time, President Barack Obama said it's a model not just for the country, but for the world. And so it has been used now since to get that political framework and governance framework in the Tampa Bay region, Jacksonville, and also along our Treasure Coast and Southwest Coast as well in the state of Florida. All right, next slide. And so out of that grew a Resilient Utility Council and a One Water Academy. Here again is that compact. And so the Resilient Utility Council was a group of water utilities in the Southeast Florida that became the first sector within society to and professionally to develop their own organization. And the main goal of that organization has been to seek ways to operationalize resilience. You know, we of course have to have the political support. We need to have the planning documents, but how do we put this into action day to day in our lives, particularly in the water world? And so that group then developed the One Water Academy, and it just started in 2020. And I want to thank Ignatius. He's been a supporter and participant on it. I will tell you, it's not taken off like we wanted it to, and I'll be perfectly honest about that. I think part of it was we started right when COVID hit, and as we were talking before we got started today, every possible way to be on a computer for your work suddenly became real, and we were on Zoom all day, and maybe you're on LinkedIn at night or Facebook. So we have not grown as much as we'd like, but we are thankful for the people who have participated. And it's actually more than just a way to communicate between each other in post news and things like that. It's also, we have a capability to do this learning management system. It's a very powerful tool. And so that's the part we're really kind of sitting back right now and reassessing how we can make that work with all the other different internet abilities that are out there for people to utilize. But our goal is to really get subject matter experts together, technology providers, and have these communities of practice and really work on ways to make new, innovative information available and throughout an organization, not just within leadership, not just within middle management, but all the way, to the people at the base of an organization. Because for them to grow, they need to learn about some of these resilient ideas, these practices, and they may have their own ideas as well. And so this is still a goal we're working on. And for those of you who have seen me talk at CWWA, I wanted to give you an update on that. Post-disaster resiliency. I'm a member of the Florida Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network. And also, as Ignatius mentioned, I'm on the advisory committee for Operators Without Borders. Most of you probably know Valerie. Jenkinson. She actually came, this was the last in-person meeting I had before COVID, and her too, back in March of 2020. She came to talk to a group that's very associated with Flaw-Warren, which is the Southeast Florida Utility Council, which represents over 50 water utilities in the Southeast Florida area. Both groups were brought together for utilities to help utilities after a storm. And particularly Flaw-Warren started, we had 8 hurricanes impact the state between 2004 and 2005. And we have our emergency operations centers, you know, some similar to your countries. Many of you have the emergency management agencies. But within this Flaw-Warren system, we're able to work directly with utilities that know each other and can call and say, hey, I need X amount of certain supply. I need 6 operators, because our 6 operators are dealing with fixing their house or just tired. They need a new relief group. And so that's part of our success in Flaw-Warren. Our last big event, and this slide or this photo of the hurricane basin is actually from 2020. And I don't have to remind you that we live together in Hurricane Alley. But Hurricane Michael in 2018, we sent over 60 water utility providers to the Panhandle, and across the state, 300 responded. And one of the goals that we have in Flaw-Warren and Operators Without Borders is, working to get our operators able to come to the Southeast when there is a need to rebuild water systems after a hurricane system or other disaster has occurred. So that's a work in progress. We're learning from, you maybe have heard of our strike force teams that are made up of South Florida law enforcement and medical emergency personnel. They're already pre-launched. They're ready to go within hours of an event somewhere. And so I'm trying to learn through them, and they do a lot of their work through US Aid. But any ideas that you all have about how we could help with emergency response here in Florida, particularly being so close, I certainly would like to hear about. And then to kind of close out the organizational part of this presentation, hopefully this will look all familiar to you, but I think it's a very impressive list of organizations that are trying to bring progress and resiliency to the Caribbean, seeking resilient solutions. The Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, this is a picture of their newsletter, certainly is one that I've enjoyed reviewing and learning about over the last few years. Just back in July, you had Chris Corbin talking about the Crew Plus program, and that initiative funded by the Global Environment Fund, and then implemented by the UN and IDB and the CEP, the Caribbean Environmental Program. The Caribbean Development Bank, Global Water Partnership, SEDEMA, PAHO, all critical organizations within your region to make it more resilient. And if you weren't aware, it's the 30th anniversary of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. And the conference is very close, October 3rd through 8th. I'm going to make a couple plugs through this presentation for the conference. The high-level forum, the ministers responsible for water, your policy makers, understanding the importance and embracing the regional strategic action plan. And then CAWASA, certainly you all, and I want to thank you for being here today to hear about some resilience discussion. And you all are a critical part of seeking resilient solutions within the Caribbean. So there's some organizations. I hope if you are interested in some and you can't find information on them, please contact me. But now we'll go into some water sector resilient practices. And when I read my definition, well, it's not my definition, the Rockefeller Foundation definition, I talked to shocks and then stresses. And shocks are your sudden events and the things that happen. I mean, you may have a few days to prepare or maybe even a month, but the event itself is sudden and often catastrophic. And just this year alone, just think of what we've had to face when it comes to catastrophes. Barbados was hit admittedly by a fast-moving storm, but I believe it was one of the first hurricanes to hit the island in many, many years, decades. We had hurricanes that went to Louisiana, Hurricane Ida, which is not unusual. In fact, for Louisiana, they had 3 or 4 last year, so they're kind of tired of them. But then it went up to New Jersey and New York and caused incredible flooding. And that area had also been hit by a tropical storm back in July. Earthquakes, where we all our hearts are felt, our heartfelt sympathy and support for the people of Haiti. And I want to thank Ignatius. I know he's personally been involved in the response, but it was obviously terrible to see another event hit Haiti, especially an earthquake. And of course, here in South Florida, we have a very big Haitian population, and my county government leading a donation drive, and they estimated it was 10% of the Broward County population is either from Haiti or Haitian descent. Volcanoes, here's a picture from Ignatius. He's been busy on the response throughout the Caribbean so far this year, and this is in St. Vincent and Grenadines. Of course, the volcano hit and went off in St. Vincent. The flooding in Guyana in May and June, and then the flooding that we just saw in New Jersey. So all the shocks that we're used to seeing that hit us, and this is, again, the shorter time scale. And the last one, this is one I think that we all as an industry, no matter where you find yourself on earth, the cyber terrorism risk are continuing to grow. And even though we have great professional IT folks that know how to protect us, it's sort of like building a mousetrap and the mouse gets smarter, and then you build another mousetrap and the mouse gets smarter. And so cyber terrorism is certainly one that's at the front of our radar here in the United States. Okay, so the stresses, the more long-term stresses, and sea level rise, climate. A lot of these are climate change. We're going to see some exacerbation of droughts, saltwater intrusion. I'll be talking a little bit about that on a slide a little bit later. Population and development pressures. In the state of Florida, they estimate over 1,000 people come to our state every day. And so where are those people going to get their water? Limited resources. That's just a fact in many places, and even in places who think they have resources, when you have thousands of people moving to you, suddenly those resources get depleted quickly. Aging infrastructure, depending on when your main cities were developed, the infrastructure could have been built 50, 60, 70 years ago. The drought perhaps you've read about the drought in the Western United States and Canada, epic fires that are just devastating communities. You can see in this picture from the San Gabriel Reservoir in California, there is no reservoir. And when we think of sea level rise and its impacts, South Florida is certainly at the epicenter of that. This is downtown Miami looking to the east, the local waterway called the Biscayne Bay. And in Florida, and I think based on my travels in the Caribbean, a lot of Caribbean wastewater plants and drinking water plants are close to water. And the same is true for Miami. For 2.5 million people and all the visitors they get, their 3 wastewater treatment plants are all within a flood inundation zone with a storm surge. And it gets worse as we look forward and at the sea level rise of 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, et cetera. And so that's certainly a stressor that my colleagues at Miami-Dade County are working with. And then just aging infrastructure, this picture of hydrogen sulfide, the gases can get into and corrode our wastewater lines over time. So I'm going to go through some capital projects that we're doing to achieve resilience. This is one at the utility that I work with, and we're very proud of it. It's a cogeneration facility, and where we're taking our biogas produced during the anaerobic digestion process. And we're also adding fats, oils, and greases that we get from local restaurants. They capture that product. And it does a couple things. It makes us more resilient from a electric utility standpoint. We're able to produce almost 20% of our electric from the fat, oil, grease, and the anaerobic digestion, all of that co-generated together. It also helps us, as I mentioned previously, try to reduce our greenhouse gases, part of the compact, our policy group goal for our region. And so it's almost equivalent to taking 2,000 cars off the road annually as far as our carbon footprint. Just one facility doing that, but if multiple facilities start to do that, it's that sum of parts, that when it comes to something on the scale of our globe, reducing carbon, yes, there's some big players out there, but also as smaller systems become more efficient, it all adds up. And then there's the money savings, so it helps us, and certainly we'll talk about it again, but financial resiliency is certainly a major part of your overall resiliency strategy. And just a little program we have here, and wanted to talk about, and it has to do with fats, rags, oils, and greases. We have a big education program to keep people from putting the wrong things into the sewer system, because as many of you know, that can lead to breaks and clogs and all those types of things. So a lot of people have a FOG program, but we ended up doing with FROG. So fats, rags, oils, and greases. And it's just part of our overall program for outreach here at our utility. Okay, capital projects to achieve resilience. So one thing, actually, Ignatius and I shared some emails, or maybe it was text through the One Water Academy, but asset management and assessment. And then if you add that with good investment, you'll have a resilient capital improvement program. And basically knowing your system, knowing where your system is most likely to break, and where you want to prioritize your investments over. In our case, we generally look out 5 years. Our state legislature this year passed a bill that we're now going to have to look out 20 years with our financial planning. Now that won't be at the same scale, as far as knowing exactly to the penny what we're going to spend 20 years from now, but just understanding across the state, what's the need for infrastructure improvements? What's the cost that our state legislature is going to assist local governments and utilities with moving forward? The other thing I like to show with this slide, and this is from my colleague here at Broward County, Carlos Garcia. Here's a case where we're also being resilient to a climate change affected phenomenon called saltwater intrusion. In South Florida, we have a very porous limestone groundwater, several Caribbean, and so as sea level rises, it's coming closer into our well fields. We get drinking water from well fields. There we go. Thank you for muting. So we get our groundwater from we get our drinking water from groundwater, and then we distribute it. And we are a coastal community, and so many of our pipes go through areas that have this daily tidal activity in the groundwater. And the metal pipes are much more impacted by saltwater intrusion than PVC. So one of our programs is to go in and replace those on an ongoing basis. Hardening facilities, many of you have probably heard of this term, but it's essentially making your building structures, your other components out in the field more ready to handle particularly high winds in the areas that we live in. Here's an example from one of our water treatment plants before. It was fairly strong, but really not up to hurricane level protection of having a metal door and some these, actually you can see the lights through there, some almost plastic looking windows. And so we've since replaced that with hurricane rated E strength windows and doors. And I don't know how many of you have gone through a storm with these types of windows. I went through a tropical storm with one, and when you're used to like closing all the shutters and everything's sort of dark, or you get candles, when you're got it open, you see everything flying by you. It was kind of a unique experience. But this type of technology can be used now to protect buildings, and it's certainly one way to achieve resilience. Heightening, and this is certainly one I think many of you can either are already doing or perhaps planning or thinking about, and that's raising your facility's assets up to either deal with future sea level rise. In South Florida, we have daytime, we call it blue sky flooding, particularly when we have these especially high tides called king tides due to the lunar phase and the position of the oceans at that time of the year, where you'll be walking down Las Olas Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale and the streets will be flooding, or you'll be in South Beach and the streets will be flooding, and it's the high tide coming in. And so again, many of our coastal communities go back to the 1920s and 30s, and they have systems that were not built for that type of condition. Also, if you have a facility along a major tributary, a major river, as many in the Caribbean do, it's important to understand if you could raise your infrastructure and still, of course, be able to operate efficiently, will that protect it more resilient to a flooding event? So in this case, this is a picture of our withdrawal pumps. I mentioned that we withdraw our drinking water from the groundwater. It's called the Biscayne Aquifer. It's about 100 feet down in the ground. And in this case, we've now put this up almost a little over 2 feet for some anticipated flooding that could occur. And again, that's another picture from my colleague Carlos. So definitely when we talk about heightening, and this is just another example, but I think I use this slide, I think, in every presentation I give, because it personifies in South Florida, and I believe in parts of the Caribbean and other low-lying areas, what we're going to have to deal with sea level rise. And so in Miami-Dade County, they have a wastewater plant. The oldest one is built in the 20s and 30s, just east of downtown, out on an area next to Key Biscayne. You may have heard of Key Biscayne. And it's obviously low. I mean, you don't need, this is certainly a picture tells 1,000 words of what could happen with sea level rise, but also with storm surge. And that's what the county did. They developed models, used models, computer models, to simulate what would happen with 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot sea level rise, and then a category 1 through 5 hurricane. What does that storm surge look like on our facility? And this facility was impacted by Hurricane Andrew, so they also had some historical information back in 1992. So if we look down here at this picture, this is the old chlorine building, and this is the roof of the chlorine building. Now, based on the new modeling and the information they had, they developed a new floor elevation. So the floor elevation is essentially the ceiling elevation of the previous structure. That is, now that's not just for sea level rise again, that's also to anticipate that storm surge should a hurricane of a certain strength hit. But certainly, and this number will certainly catch your eye, 87% of Central District wastewater treatment were below a design elevation. And so they're working hard to make themselves more resilient, being literally at ground zero sea level rise. So those are some construction, the major infrastructure type practices. And I just referenced modeling. So I want to touch on the science that we use, science and engineering. I guess I should have put it in the slide, but we certainly need that to continue to grow and add to our knowledge. It makes our decisions as water utilities more accurate and more efficient and looking forward. I mentioned the saltwater intrusion issue in South Florida. What you're looking at here is a map of eastern Broward County. There's the Miami-Dade County line. So if you went south about 20 miles, you'd be from this spot on my pointer, you'd be in downtown Miami. My water utility, all these little dots and gray areas are what we call utility well fields. And that's where all these little dots, those pumps that I just showed previously, that's where those pumps are located. Fortunately, for the newer development in the county that pretty much happened after the 1980s, they're pretty safe. But we have what are called coastal well fields, when here's the ocean. And these little half squares here are water control structures or salinity control structures. So this canal here is freshwater, this here is saltwater. This is the intercoastal, one of our saltwater canals that goes to the Atlantic Ocean. And this line, this purple line, is where salt water was measured in a well down in the ground and at a level 250 milligrams per liter isochlor, saltwater interface, that makes a well field unusable. In other words, the salt is too high. And when I say unusable, I'm not saying it could be, obviously, if you went to a desalination process, but from the current water treatment plant treatment. For example, we use lime softening at our Broward County facilities. So this is a 2014, this is 2009. And so over this period of 5 years, we've seen the saltwater increase. And recently, some new data is suggesting that the line's moving even closer to one of my colleagues' well fields up here in Pompano. But having that information makes us as resilient utility managers understand that if I'm in Pompano, that's well fields, do I need to relocate those? That practice, which is not cheap, particularly in an urban environment. We need that science to help us make the decisions. In the Caribbean, I think one of the great science networks that is working there is the Caribbean Drought and Precipitation Monitoring Network. When I first started getting involved with CWWA, Ignatius introduced me to this, and just a great tool, a great network. Certainly the goal to increase the capacity of Caribbean countries to deliver an equitable and sustainable integrated water resource management. Certainly a goal that we all can get behind, and working to meet your capacity for water management needs. I assume most of you have been through this, but I just wanted to highlight it as a good type of science that we need to help us with decision making. This is the Precipitation Index for 3 different, over the 3 months, May, June, July of this year, and then looking out, for the most part, except for our friends in the Bahamas, right 50 miles across from me and a little farther north for most of you. Looks like longer term, they may need to be watching out, and then a little bit of drought watch down towards the southeast part of the Caribbean. But a great tool, and one I continue to use, and hopefully you do too. And so I mentioned saltwater intrusion, I mentioned drought. So my next few slides on resilient practices, I want to talk about what are some resilient ways that we can manage drought, make our water supply, augment our water supply so that when we go into drought conditions, that we still have water available to serve our public. And one way that we're working in South Florida is building reservoirs, and it's part of throughout our system. You may have heard of the Everglades. We have a very large Everglades restoration project going on, and they're building reservoirs to capture water. Because our system, as you look at these maps, this is Palm Beach County, so Miami's about 40 miles to the south, 50 miles. And this is that Broward County area again, Miami, about 20 miles to the south. Atlantic Ocean's about right here in Broward. And throughout South Florida, for those of you who had the opportunity to visit or maybe even lived previously, we have over 1,000 miles of canals. That the reason we live here, they drain the Everglades. And so this system is very good at taking water and sending it to sea. But that's bad for ecology, and it's not very good for water supply. So we're working on building reservoirs to help with both ecology and water supply. And there's a particular project known as the C51 Reservoir, where several South Florida utilities working on a private-public partnership. We're going to store water here that would normally go out the Lake Worth Lagoon into the Atlantic Ocean, store excess water when you have it, and then use your distribution systems, in this case, a canal system, an external distribution system, to send that water to the different well fields that need it. This will be particularly important as our population continues to grow over the next 40, 50 years. In the Caribbean, I think you all know and appreciate the importance of rainwater harvesting. It's another one of those sum of parts where it provides those benefits to the homeowner or the property owner. But when you look across, a watershed collectively, you're creating a lot of water supply. And certainly the Global Water Partnership has been a leader in this. And there's a report that was done for CARICOM and UNEP. Education is an important component of rainwater harvesting. In fact, all the work that we do as utilities. And so certainly one of the tools in the toolbox. I also just got my hands on this report, and that was done by the Global Water Partnership. And if you haven't had a chance to review it, I would recommend you do. Looking at the status, need, and the role of freshwater storage in the Caribbean. And particularly for the areas that are similar to Florida, like we get 60 inches of rain on average, some years 90. If we can capture that water, even putting it underground into wells, they're called aquifer storage and recovery wells, certainly a chance to make our water supply more resilient, our source water more resilient. Because once it's out in the ocean, it's into the global geological water cycle, right? And so when we can keep it within our service areas and are able to use it when times are dry, is certainly an important resiliency goal. Another resilient water supply stressor practice dealing with droughts and population growth, non-revenue water, reducing non-revenue water. Many of you have met, I hope, Stuart Hamilton over the years, if you have attended CWWA events or perhaps International Water Association. He's with a group called Maya, a global company, and he's also the CWWA Water Loss Specialist Group Chair. Along with the International Water Association Water Loss Specialist Group Chair. And he has a stat that always blows me away every time I hear the presentation. 3.6 billion liters of water lost each day because of non-revenue water. And non-revenue water is water that's produced by your facility, but for a number of different reasons, does not end up at the tap. And so it's certainly something that I'm very in tune with, and I'm just joined, jumping down to that last bullet. CWWA has just launched a water loss specialist group. If you have any interest at all in non-revenue water reduction, please let me know. We're just starting. We're going to hopefully get our newsletter out in a couple of weeks. We are going to host a pre-conference non-revenue water loss workshop, and we'll certainly keep Ignatius in the know of when that will be. It should be the last week of September, either the 29th or 30th or the 1st of October, right in that time frame. Because putting in another plug for the CWWA conference, October 3rd through the 8th, 2021. But hopefully you've seen the great work that the National Water Commission in Jamaica has done. Mark Barnett, I've had the opportunity to see him present 3 different times, and each time it just shows what dedication and a lot of hard work and getting your policymakers behind you as well. And they have reduced their overall non-revenue water by 31%. And that's in the Kingston, St. Andrews area. And then actually within the one sector that they've reduced it 63%. And so they've worked with Mile Water on that, and Stewart's been part of that as well. And I think the Bahamas have also worked with Maya. And so with water loss, in some places over 60, 70%, certainly reducing that is a resilient goal as we work to be prepared for droughts and in times of water scarcity. Another one that I know Chris Corbin touched on in his number 17 in the CAWASA webinar series is reusing water, alternative water supplies. And I thought there was some good discussion last month, I think, yes, well, I guess it was back in July, about this, you know, where does it have a chance to grow in the Caribbean? Certainly desalination has, and is a very good and accepted tool, particularly on the water scarce islands. But I'm actually coming to CWWA virtually. It's a virtual conference, and I'm going to talk about water reuse in the state of Florida and the way we've been able to produce it, and just have a conversation on ways to potentially make the technology a part of your toolbox. We've started actually back in the late 60s, even in some cities, but just to give you a gauge of how much we reuse. Now this is in gallons. And so 1998, this is the amount of reuse that was produced. It's almost, if you can't quite see the number, it's right around 500, you know, and 10 years later, we were at 659. And in 2020, we're approaching 900 million gallons a day. And a lot of that it has been due to the population growth more than drought. But we do occasionally get droughts, and having that as an added water supply is certainly a resilient resource to have. Other places across, including, well, we're starting rulemaking in Florida for potable reuse, where you actually do most of this reuse in this graph is actually irrigation. And so, you know, putting on golf courses, putting on lawns, and some agricultural production. But Singapore is producing 40% of its drinking water supply from potable reuse. And so the technology is there. You have to certainly have we're getting ready and have just kicked off in Florida a public education outreach to let people know it's safe, it's reliable, and an important part of Florida's water future. So more to come. I don't want to give away all my thunder for the CWWA, but I hope you can join me. Or if you can't join that conference and you have more interest in alternative water supplies, including desal and water reuse, I'd be glad to talk with you. All right, so those are some of the practices. I'm going to go through a few tools. And when I say tools, it's a way for, you know, again, like I said, for you to get a status of where your utility is. Where am I at in terms of resiliency? Where do I want to go? And how do I get there? And so those are some of the things we like to try to get out of the many different tools that are out there. I'm not going to dive into each one, just going to kind of go over the main highlights. And then if it's something you'd like to further discuss, certainly I look forward to that conversation. And many things in the United States, laws in Congress drive what happens at state and local level. And our Congress passed the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018, and it had many different provisions, but the one that is relevant for today's discussion is the Risk and Resiliency Assessment and Emergency Response Plan Development. So Congress looked out across our 50 states and territories, including the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, and said, if you are serving more than 3,300 people, you need to understand your risk and resilience. You need to do an assessment. and report that to the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Fortunately, EPA has relied on this process, and it's just been ongoing the last couple of years. We just completed ours at Broward County, and they use primarily the American Water Works Association, which, as Ignatius noted, I'm a member and work on a lot of the state level committees. Risk and resilience management of water and wastewater systems. And this is a really good document that has evolved over the years, and we were very glad to see that adopted by our federal agency. Also with AWWA is a person by the name of Kevin Morley, and he's developed a utility resilience index that can help your utility sort of understand, again, where are you at in resiliency world and where do you want to go? And some of the key components to that are emergency planning, understanding critical assets, ability to meet minimum daily demand or treatment. And that's keep that in mind, and I'll go to the next slide. Emergency power capabilities, mutual aid and assistance. And again, that goes back to this index is a little US specific and maybe a little bit with Canada, because we do have those mutual aid programs like the Florida Warn that I mentioned, where if something happens in South Florida, Jacksonville is going to come and help. If something happens in Jacksonville, Broward County is going to go up to Jax. And then financial indicators, because finance needs to be part of the resiliency strategy. This is an example from Broward County's AWEA analysis. This is a conceptual graph. These are not real numbers, just to give you a kind of a taste of what it was like to go through this analysis. These are called asset threat pairs. We went through 120 of these for our 2 different water treatment plants, and then a third service area. We buy bulk water, treated water from the city of Hollywood, one of our major cities here in Broward County. And so that well pump system, one threat could be theft. We're in an urban environment. People will if it's not nailed down in Broward County, it'll probably be gone in a few hours. Wells, contamination. And as you recall, I talked how we were starting to raise our wells, but potentially we could have floods. We can get E. coli, bacteria type contamination, or potentially even something worse. And so that's one of the threats that we looked at. Hurricane, how are our generators? What is their risk, and what scale of hurricane? And then there's the one I talked about before that worries me a lot looking into the future is cyber attacks. And right now we seem to have it under control, but we are always vigilant when it comes to our cyber attack resilience. And just to give you the way we would calculate this is we'd look at consequences. If you lose your well, you lose your source water. Vulnerability. Okay, if that well's at 12 inches, 24 inches higher than the one that's on the ground, it's less vulnerable. So you have your resiliency index, for example, your risk index would go down, your resiliency would go up. And then the threat likelihood, so we have a low lying well, but maybe it's not in the flood zone. And so those types of factors are taken into account. Resilience is longer. You're looking at gallons, duration, and that's what I meant when I said keep in mind when you're looking at your level of service, the severity, and then vulnerability again, and threat likelihood. So those are some tools that we used. Another toolkit, USAID, is a toolkit for climate resilience, water utility operations. This was for the Philippines. A couple of my colleagues here in South Florida worked on this project. And in fact, our plant, we had a guided tour with a group from the Philippine water sector. Wasn't quite twinning, which is a goal that Ignatius and I have for South Florida, but at least it was a start to exchange information. And so this is a really good document. I did not put the link on this one, I'm sorry. So please email me if you're interested in this link, and just to give you an idea of what their vulnerability assessments are like. Identify your historical operation disruptions. If you just went through a major flood, what happened? You'd quantify, well 6 flooded offline, 28 days, something to that degree. Rainfall, 12 inches, 24 hours, river up 3 feet. flood stage. Those types of climatic information help as well. Will you have future rainfall and temperature changes with climate change and those impacts on water supply? Identify your possible shortfalls, and then evaluate ways you may be able to adapt, have a communication strategy to monitor and adjust. And this assessment's very interactive with a business plan, because again, working with your finances is important as you develop your resiliency. I also, 2 years ago, I was on the CWWA panel with Robert Eves Persona from the Caribbean Development Bank and George Woolhouse from HR Wallingford. They have developed this along with for the Caribbean Development Bank, supporting the integration of climate resilience in the water supply sector, looking at all these different parameters, institutional roles, and capacity. That's one thing I really like about this one is it talks about institutional capacity, and I know that can be no matter where you're at in the world, working with your policy leaders can sometimes be a challenge. And so, and then it talks about your system as well. And then, all these different units that you can kind of see where your utility would fit within this ranking. And then last and certainly not least, the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Governance and Building Climate Resilience in the Water Sector in the Caribbean. This is from Wayne Williams, the Executive Director of CWWA. We just had I thought it was an excellent Florida Section American Water Works, along with CAWASA, CWWA, and the Puerto Rican AWWA chapter. We had a Caribbean Florida water link up back in May, 2 hours or so of presentations and another 2 hours of social, and Ignatius was part of that. But the RSAP is, your roadmap in the Caribbean to be resilient for the water sector, and certainly governance is right at the top in the middle. Resource management, there's your science you need for the informed decisions, that research to develop the science, your water services, and your capacity building, which is one of the things that CAWASA does so well. And with that, I am done. I have time for questions. I got about 20 minutes or so, and as long as you got about to then. And I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you're watching this through video, thank you for joining the archive. And I will again put my last plug in, CWWA 2021 Virtual 30th Annual Conference and Exhibition of our host nation, the Cayman Islands. So with that, Ignatius, I turn back over to you, and look forward to any questions or comments from the crowd.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And that was another very excellent presentation. And I hope that our participants got to learn quite a bit. In fact, as you got to the final slides, I well recall the work by HR Wallingford for the Caribbean Development Bank, and there was a training of trainers held in Barbados some years ago. And I think there were subsequent activities in the countries where some of the utilities were looking at their vulnerability risk and trying to get to what we call the utility resilience indices. So some work has been done there, but of course there's need to continue and to elaborate the work. And the main thing too is that it happens at a certain level with the senior technical people as engineers. So it's good that we can get that communicated through to our operators at such a webinar, which is why we hold these webinars, at least to expose our water operators to what is taking place. And in fact, our conference in 2019 in St. Lucia, we tried to use the RSAP as the theme so that we would be able to communicate with our operators as to what to expect at the lower levels, because if they are not involved, we certainly wouldn't be able to build on or to drill down from the high up into building resilience on the ground. So it's important that our operators are aware.
Absolutely.
Over to you, participants. Please feel free to ask your questions.
Well, while they're waiting for that, I will let you know one of the authors, one of my local colleagues here in Florida, the author of that USAID, one of the authors of the USAID document, Christopher Pettit, has joined us. He's the head of our state's Department of Agriculture Water Policy Group. So, Chris, thanks for joining us, and happy birthday. It's his birthday. So.
Oh, happy birthday,
thanks, man.
Chris. In fact, I read that work some time ago. I was browsing through and trying to find some information, and I think I came across this publication for the Philippines. It was really well done. Thank you for that, Chris.
No, we appreciate it. And actually, can I just to elaborate on something that we've seen overseas and a couple of things we've done in the Caribbean, and forgive me, I'm in the car. I hope I'm not getting a whole lot of feedback, but Kev, I mean, you did a great job on the presentation. Thought it was really, really well done. And Kevin is just an amazing resource that I encourage you guys to utilize. I just wanted to talk a little bit further. You've got a lot of emphasis on
we lost you a little bit, man.
Yeah, I think he's on the road, so we're losing him a bit, but we'll wait when he gets better signal.
Systems, a lot of emphasis on operations and vulnerability assessments, everything else. One of the things that we saw, one of the things that we
Be safe, my friend.
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Yeah.
He can join in whenever he's ready.
Yeah. So, anyone else? Questions, comments, perspective?
Another interesting point that you raised was I quite liked was about the water. Oh, Chris is back with us. Go ahead, Chris. I think he's trying to join, but his signal is not very good. It was about your resilient water supply streams, which I think in South Florida, where you were using your canals and extracting water from the Everglades and recharging your aquifers. I think in Jamaica, there was a paper that was written about that and presented at one CWWA. I don't know how far they got with that, but one of the challenges, I think, in Jamaica, you have a lot of the water resource in the northern part of Jamaica, and the demand is greater in the Kingston, St. Andrew area. And now the challenge is to be able to create the channels to get the water to that part of the country. And in some respects, in some of the islands, we have similar challenges. In fact, you would have all of that rainfall like we had during the passage of the various hurricanes, and it simply washes out to the sea.
Yeah.
And so we don't have what we need to work on seems to me is on the storage capacity of the types of reservoirs. So you would have raw water stored that can be treated and reallocated during the drier periods.
Yeah.
And so, but these are major capital works, in building resilience.
They are, but they can really give you, some of that.
Yes, Chris, are you back with us?
That extra water. Uh-oh.
Nope, still can't hear me. All right, I gave it a shot.
We're getting you now. Yes,
oh, you're getting me now. All right. Well, actually, to build on that point, the question I was going to ask, and this is what we saw overseas, greater watershed management in terms of you've got existing structures, but you mentioned storage in the system. When you have a surface water system that's running through various sloughs and whatnot, When you're dealing with informal economies, when you're dealing with other impacts to the ecohydrology, the ability to engage on a socio-cultural and a governance level, I mean, that we found that to be a very key part of resilience, is engaging in those local communities. And, for those folks that, if you're growing rubber trees or you're burning some of the watershed that holds the soils in place, so you don't have those high levels of turbidity that require then massive amounts of alum to be added to settle out the total suspended solids. Kevin, I just, to get into that broader, it's one thing to take a look at your system. It's another thing to go that next level of resilience broader, to integrate yourself with, say, agriculture or other land uses within that broader watershed.
Agreed, and wholeheartedly agreed. And I know there's been some really good work with Dr. Cashman, Adrian Cashman, on integrated water management on those issues. Also, I had the opportunity to visit a utility in the Dominican Republic in 2015, Corazon in Santiago, and they actually have a program that in the Yaqui River Basin where they're part of a group that pays farmers not to harvest trees near a water body, just to do what Chris's point, the urban utility downstream of the agricultural area, they work together to conserve the soil and not have that turbid water and those types of things. So yes, and I believe, and Ignatius, you could probably build on this, it's one of the RSAP's, one of its key components is having everybody in our silos, which it's easy to do day to day. You get stuck in your own utility because it's 24/7, 365, but zooming out and being part of that integration. So good point, Chris.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, under the RSAP, as you mentioned, that's one of the components, looking at integrated water resource management. And one of the lead agencies, or one of the lead partners, would be the Global Water Partnerships Caribbean, GWPC. They have done quite a bit of work over the years, trying to encourage integrated water resource management, as well as through the CREW projects and the UN environment. They have done very well in leading on those. So these are very critical areas with the various, and some of the countries now are moving into having, I think, where you have that in place, so say in Jamaica, where there's a water resources management agency that looks after the management of the watersheds, as you have in St. Lucia, and I think Grenada. There's a department within the Ministry of Agriculture, but I think there's a work in progress with support from the GIZ, the German Technical Development Agency, and under some project funded on the Green Climate Fund, to establish a unit within the CAWASA, the water utility. So I think there's a works in progress, and it's gradually catching up. So there's work in that regard, but we need to be steadfast and be sure that we can protect the sources. Any other comments, colleagues, or observations, questions you may have for Kevin? And I think Chris Petit is still with us, so feel free to make good use of those resources we have before us now.
Well, Kevin, did you want to mention some of the source water protection stuff? And I mean, just to expand on that, some of the stuff we're trying to work on under the Farm Bill. And, we can always talk about the struggles that we've had. One of the challenges we have here in Florida, especially under Basin Management Action Planning, which is our water quality side, is how to integrate all these different sources and how to do holistic water management. I would be safe in saying I think that we've gone backwards over the last 10 to 15 years here, and a large part of it is political. We actually did away with our statewide land management agency that helped take a look at those things. We had regional planning councils that have had their power taken away by the legislature, that helped us look at development patterns and various things. We've got some interesting examples, both on the good and the bad here in Florida, that I think have been, can be very instructive when you're trying to look at things in terms of holistic watershed management and the way in which utilities and local governments can integrate into these, at times, very contentious and complicated political processes. But Kevin's always been more succinct and eloquent than me, so I'll lean on him on that point.
No, you're making my head grow, man. Thank you for that, Chris, and all the good words. And yeah, certainly, I would agree. We have almost gone backwards in some of our ways, and in other ways we've certainly, I think, made some improvement. But it's that, and I say improvements, the one water genre and movement. But that's still yet to really be a policymaker issue, although I guess this past year it was kind of. So, but yeah, those are good things, and add those to the list of the things that I've discussed previously. And the purpose of this talk was to sort of put some major highlights out there, and then for you, either live or in listening mode later, can reach out, and we'll I'll put you in touch with somebody like Chris, and we're very lucky. Chris is an institution too, because he has worked at a water management district. He's been to 50 countries. He worked in the public water utility, and now he's the head of an agricultural agency. So he's done the whole water cycle, and I think it's that type of leadership. And then you have that in the Caribbean, particularly in the RSAP process, that you need to have everybody working, trying to integrate. And then the integration as well, regionally, I'm sure Ignatius has something that RSAP will continue to work with, is having neighbors, helping neighbors across the Caribbean to be integrated.
Right. Well, let me thank you again, Kevin. I know you got to be running off to another important event, and thank you for giving us your time this afternoon on behalf of our CAWASA team and the CWWA and all the partners in the region. And we look forward to hearing from you soon at the pre-conference workshop of the CWWA. This is our CAWASA webinar series 2021 series number 19, and where we bring you and discuss all things about water and wastewater sector in the Caribbean, and we integrate with other partners to be sure that our operators are exposed to the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening all. Keep safe and well. Ignatius Jean from CAWASA signing off. Bye.
Good evening. Thank you.